Welcome to Unleashed Leader Video 8, where we're going to begin diving into community. Now, we've just spent 2 videos talking about clarity and how you create clarity. And once clarity is more and more created, then it's time to begin developing community. In fact, community is a pretty natural outcome of clarity. So in order to understand community, I think it's important for us to go back to the definition of what a leader is. We've defined a leader as someone who sees a clear, preferred, and desired future, who gathers others around that preferred future, and then who mobilizes them to collaboratively create that future together. So what in the world does community have to do with being a leader? Well, if you're going to gather people and you're going to mobilize people to create this preferred future together, it's going to take a community. You see, a community is simply a group of people who come together around a common interest, common vision, or common goals. There are communities all over the world, whether it's communities of people who are interested in playing board games together, or communities of people who come together because their kids play soccer together, or communities who come together because they want to make the world a better place. Your workplace should have community that is emerging around the desire that everyone has about this preferred future that you are creating. But over the years, we've seen 3 big mistakes that leaders make when it comes to community. The first big mistake that leaders make is that they don't value relationships at all. Some leaders are highly results oriented. They're focused so much on accomplishing the goals that they fail to realize how important it is to build relationships and to enable relationships to be built. So the first mistake is just forgetting about relationships altogether. Now, the second big mistake that we see is on the opposite side of that. This mistake happens when leaders begin assuming that they need to be friends with everyone. Now, this is dangerous because you want to be friendly to everyone who you work with, but you don't have to be friends. In fact, there are some dangers to friendships in the workplace when you're the direct supervisor over someone. One of the dangers is that the more you become friends with someone that you supervise, the harder it is to have the hard conversations. You begin to justify their actions. You begin to excuse bad behavior because you care about that person. You love that person. And as a result of that, sometimes your friendships can get in the way. So when we talk about community, we're not saying that you need to become friends with everyone. In fact, friendships can be very detrimental. The third big mistake that we see leaders make is they attempt to create community. As the leader, it is not your job to create community. It is your job to create an environment in which community can take place. Now listen to that again. There's a very small distinction there, but it's very important. As the leader, your job is not to create community. Your role is to create environments in which community can take place. Let's talk a little bit about the difference between this. So what does it mean to create community? Many leaders tend to think that they are the ones who are responsible to create community. And so one day your team and your co-workers walk into the office and they get an email from you. And it says, "Team, this Saturday we're having a barbecue at my house at noon. can't wait to see everyone there. Now, very often a leader in that position thinks, look at me, I've just created great community. I'm hosting a barbecue at my house. Look what I have done. But think about what it's like on the receiving end of that email. The person who gets it goes over to one of their coworkers and said, hey, did you see that email? Do you think we have to go to this? And the other person says, well, probably don't have to go, but it's probably not really good for your career. I mean, you're wanting to get that promotion, right? So you should probably go to it. So then that person calls up his spouse and says, hey, you know how we had beach plans this weekend? We're gonna have to scrap those so that we can go to a barbecue that's being hosted by my boss so that I can make sure I get in good and get that promotion. At the end of this time, you've not created community. In fact, you've unintentionally destroyed community. No longer are the people who are coming to that barbecue interested in building relationships. They're just trying to figure out what they were supposed to do in this situation. You don't have to be the creator of communities. Instead, you want to create environments in which community can take place. You want to create spaces at the office where community can build. You want to work with other people who can guide community development efforts. So we're going to understand this more as we dive into this in this video and the next. But don't make the mistake of thinking that you need to be the creator of community. Instead, you're creating environments in which community can take place. If you're going to create environments in which community takes place, then it's important to understand the 5 best practices or the 5 qualities of a great workplace community. That's what we're going to focus on in these next 2 videos. Once you begin to understand what a great workplace community looks like, you can become the person who makes sure that you create environments for that to happen. The first quality of a great workplace community is that you're moving toward a shared vision. A great workplace community has everyone excited about moving toward a shared vision. Now, this is one of the reasons why clarity was so important first, because it's the vision, the big, hairy, audacious goal that you identified that's going to bring your team together. Hopefully, they're not just there to collect a paycheck or to get their service hours in. You want a community of people who are committed to a shared vision together. You as the leader have responsibility to make sure that everyone is clear on what that big goal is. I like to say that every team needs a common goal or a common enemy. So in the United States, when we were racing against Russia to see who could make it to the moon first, there was both a common goal and a common enemy. The common goal was to make it to the moon, to travel to the moon. And John F. Kennedy rallied people around that vision that by the end of the 60s, America would make it to the moon. But they also had a common enemy. They had other nations that they were fighting against to get there first. As a leader, you remind people consistently of the common vision, the common goal. Because here's the reality. If you don't remind people of the common goal or the common enemy, then chances are you will become the common enemy. You will be the person who brings people together. They'll talk about you at the water cooler. They'll get upset with you. You'll be the person that they go home and they're frustrated with. So provide them with a common goal or a common enemy that comes out of your clarity training. We're not going to spend a long time talking about that because you've just spent the last 2 videos working on that. So let's go ahead and talk about the second quality of a great workplace community. A great workplace community has a sense of safety that permeates it. Do you remember ever learning about Maslow's hierarchy of needs? He says that there are 5 needs that people have in order to reach a place of self-actualization. Maslow's first level of needs was people need physiological needs taken care of. We need food and clothing and shelter and warmth. Once those are taken care of, then we have what are called safety needs. We need safety and security. We need to know that we're not in danger. That's exactly what a community needs in order to thrive. We need you to create an environment that is safe. Whenever people are evaluating how safe they are, there are essentially 2 questions that they are asking. The first question is, can I trust the people that I'm working with? They want to know, do the people I work with have my best interest in mind? Can I trust them with confidential information? Can I trust that if I tell them something that they're not going to turn around and share that with others? There is this need for safety that comes in the form of, can I trust other people? The second question that people ask themselves is, am I playing by the rules of this community? You see, every community has rules that govern it. But if you don't know the rules of the game, then it's very hard to play the game. And in a workplace environment, you need to know what's okay to do and what's not okay to do. In order to answer those 2 questions for people, can I trust the people around me, and do I know the rules of the game? You're going to develop 2 tools. The first tool is called the 5 levels of trust. And the second tool is called team operating principles. Let's dive in to the 5 levels of trust. The first tool that you need is what are called the 5 levels of trust. In order for your team to feel safe, they need to trust each other, but trust is one of those fuzzy and ambiguous ideas that we don't know as leaders how to develop trust. That is, until this guy named Scott Wozniak created the 5 levels of trust. Scott is the author of this book, How to Fail as a Leader. He's also a very dear friend of mine, and his understanding of how trust is developed has been revolutionary in helping me and many, many other leaders understand how to create trust with each person that you work with. So, in order to create trust, you need to understand that there are actually 5 levels of trust. And the goal is not to make every person get to the 5th level of trust. Instead, the goal for working relationships is to at least get to level 3. So for each of the levels, there is something that you share in order to establish that level of trust. Let's dive into this. The first level of trust is when you share facts. So imagine for a second that you meet someone for the first time. What are you going to share? You're going to share your name and where you work and what the title of your position is. Maybe you're going to share your spouse's name or where you grew up. You're just sharing facts about each other. Before you share those facts, y'all are complete strangers. But once those facts are established, you have level 1 trust. Level 2 trust happens when you begin to share experiences. An experience could be eating a meal together, or a shared film that you've both watched, or a shared experience is working together. It's when you have shared experiences that you begin to trust the person a little bit more. You've somehow spent time with them. So imagine for a second that you showed up at work every day and there was somebody there who you worked with, but you could not remember their name. You could not remember anything about them. You would not have level 2 trust because you have to have the facts first before you share experiences. But once those experiences are there, you're at a level 2 trust with them. The third level of trust happens when you begin to share opinions. Now, there are low-risk opinions and high-risk opinions. When you begin to share low-risk opinions, you're going to share things like your favorite movie, or your favorite song, or your favorite band, or your favorite flavor of ice cream. You're sharing opinions that you have, but these are low-risk opinions because it's not going to break trust if you and someone else have a different opinion. My favorite movie of all time is the first Matrix. I think it is the greatest movie that's ever been made. But if you disagree with me, if you think the best movie is Shawshank Redemption or Mrs. Doubtfire or Up from Disney, whatever you think, we're not going to lose trust with each other because of this difference of opinion. So there are low-risk opinions, but then there are high-risk opinions. High-risk opinions are things like what you think about religion or politics or ethics or some controversial topic. High-risk opinions do run the risk of destroying trust. So if I share with you my political beliefs and you share your political beliefs and we don't agree, it's going to take a high level of trust for us to continue working together and knowing each other and trusting one another. There are high risk opinions. So as you progress in trust, you're going to go from sharing facts to experiences to low risk opinions to high risk opinions. Now, this is where it's really important for you as a leader. The minimum possible level of productive work taking place is when everyone has at least a level 3 trust with each other. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody has to go around sharing their religious or political views, but work in and of itself, when we're committed to accomplishing a shared goal together, there will be opinions that differ. I'm going to think that we need to use one strategy and you're going to disagree with me. And as a result of that, those high-risk opinions are important. In fact, they are critical for great community to take place, for trust to be built. You need to create an environment where people can share their high-risk opinions as it pertains to the work that you're doing together. But you don't have to stop at level 3 trust. You can move on to level 4. In level 4 trust, we begin to share feelings. This is when you share how you feel about certain things. Happy or sad or angry or resentful. This is what happens as you begin to share the inner workings of what's going on in your heart and in your mind. You're not just sharing your thoughts, you're sharing your emotions. You're sharing your feelings. And the level 5 of trust is you begin to share successes and failures. Now, different cultures view this differently. For some, sharing your successes is even higher level of trust. And for other cultures, sharing your failures is the pinnacle. Typically, in the United States where I live, people are more willing to share their failures. But if you're going to share your successes, it takes a very high level of trust. Let me give you an example of how you know this is true. The next time you're meeting somebody for the first time, or just establishing a relationship with someone and they ask you how you're doing, I dare you to just start talking about the biggest success that you've had in the last few weeks and how awesome it was and how you crushed it and how proud you are of yourself. If you did that, you would immediately lose trust. Why? Because you have to go in order in these 5 levels of trust. You can't meet someone for the first time and immediately start talking about your deep emotions, unless that person is your counselor. But any other relationship, and it will destroy trust if you go too quickly or if you go out of order. Now, what in the world does this have to do with creating community? If you're going to create community, it's going to require that you build trust with each and every individual who you're working with. And the minimum amount of trust is going to be a level 3 trust with your direct team. So let me share with you just a few other insights that can help with this, and then how to use this tool. The first insight is you as the leader must go first. If you want to establish a level 4 type of trust with someone, then that means you have to share your emotions first. You have to share your feelings first. You can't wait for them to do it and then respond in kind. As the leader, you must go first. The second insight is that every team operates at the lowest common denominator. So I experienced this in a leadership role several years ago before I knew about the 5 levels of trust. I had been working with a team of about 6 people who reported to me, and we had all developed significant level 4 and even sometimes level 5 type of trust with each other. We had worked together for so long that we just absolutely trusted each other. And then we hired someone new. We knew her, we had interviewed her, and so we knew the facts. We started having level 2 experiences of working together, but our team immediately experienced a significant shift in our comfort in interacting with each other. It felt like things had completely changed. And they had changed because somebody came in and our trust for that person was only at a level 2. So the whole team dropped to a level 2. Your team will only operate at the lowest common denominator. And that's why anyone who reports to you, you've got to work to establish a level 3 trust with them. So here's a tool that I want to give you that can help you evaluate where each person is. On this grid, you're going to see 4 simple columns. In column 1, you're going to list the name of everyone who reports to you. In column 2, you're going to take a guess at what you think the level of trust is. Now, I want to give you a little ninja tip here. If you're the boss, you think that the level of trust is slightly higher than they do. So if you say that it's a level 3 trust, chances are it's actually level 2. You might feel comfortable sharing your low risk opinions, but they might not be there yet. So write the number in, just realizing though that it's probably a little bit lower than you think that it is. Then in the next column, you want to write the level of trust that you want to move to. Do you want to get to a level 3 or a level 4 or a level 5 with this person? And finally, you want to write the action that you need to take in order to get there. What would help you move in the direction of building more trust? One more thought about building trust. You don't have to have a level 5 with everyone. In fact, the higher you go up this pyramid, the less people are there. You will probably only have 5, maybe 10 people who you have a level 5 relationship with. But on level 1, where Facebook or social media exists, you might have thousands of people who are on that level. That's perfectly okay. Now here's what I want you to do. I want you to pause the video and use the grid and just write down the people who report to you, where you are in your level of trust, where you'd like to be, and what the next action will be. When you're finished with that, I'll introduce you to the next tool. Welcome back. Now remember, we said that when a person is trying to determine if they feel safe, they're asking two questions. The first question is, do I trust the people that I'm working with? And the second question is, do I know the rules of the game? The tool that you're going to design that helps people know the rules of the game are what's called your team operating principles. Several years ago, I was consulting with a team. It had a new member on the team, and they were discussing a very big decision. A decision that would shape their strategy and their plans for the next 3 to 5 years. The CEO of the organization threw out his idea, and everyone sat in silence. We sat there awkwardly for probably 30 seconds. And finally, the CEO said, okay, well, nobody has any objections. That's going to be what we do. I jumped in just before that and said, hold on, before we completely ratify that decision, let me ask a question. What does silence mean to your team? The newest member of the team said, that's an odd question. What do you mean by that? And I said, well, does silence mean that everyone agrees or everyone disagrees? That led to a fun discussion with that team in which different people thought differently. Some people said silence means agreement, and other people said silence means disagreement. I just don't feel comfortable saying anything. So I said, before we move on, we have to define exactly what silence means. And for that team, we determined that silence meant disagreement. So their silence to the CEO's suggestion could be interpreted as them disagreeing. It led to a very robust discussion where they were able to come up with a better strategy where everyone had the option of sharing. Knowing what silence is one of the rules of the game. You, as a leader, need team operating principles so that everyone is playing by the same rules. So let me give you some suggestions of areas where every team needs some team operating principles. The first is silence. Like we've already said, you need to define silence. Your team operating principle might say silence is hearty agreement, or silence is vehement disagreement. Either way, you've got to decide and define what silence means when you're making a decision. Other rules of the game that you might need to define in the team operating principles. How do you make decisions? Are most decisions made by one person, where it's what we would call a closed decision, where the leader makes the decision without any input from anyone else? Or are most decisions consultative decisions, where the leader makes a decision while listening to others, but they have a voice in the decision, but they don't get a vote? Or are they consensus decisions, where everyone has both a voice in the decision and a vote on whether to move forward? How do you make decisions? One of the most important team operating principles that you can establish is that the type of decision must be stated before it's time to make a decision. In other words, the leader says, this is a closed decision, this is a consultative decision, this is a consensus decision, or even this is a unanimous decision. In order for us to move forward, everyone must agree on this. So what is your decision-making process for major decisions that are made? That's a team operating principle. Another team operating principle is how you treat each other. In fact, you may want several team operating principles around this. For example, we treat others with dignity and respect. And we listen to each other's ideas and understand them before we disagree with them. Or we communicate openly. Now you might say to yourself, everyone should assume that those things are true, but they won't unless they're stated. When you have something like, we treat others with dignity and respect in your team operating principles, what's going to happen is someone inevitably will not treat others with dignity and respect. Instead of it being awkward and wondering how should we respond, in that moment, somebody, whether you or someone else in the group, can point to the team operating principles and say, that was a violation of our team operating principle of treating others with dignity and respect. So you want some principles in there that guide how you're going to treat each other. Another guideline that you might want is how you disagree with each other. In fact, in my team operating principles, I have this statement in there. We attack ideas and value people. We attack ideas and value people. In other words, for the teams that I lead, I want us to go after each other's ideas, to tear them apart, to rebuild them, to rethink them. We are not going to tiptoe around disagreements with each other's ideas, but we do want to value people. We want to make sure that even if we disagree with their idea, that we value the person who shared it. So that's a team operating principle you want to consider, is how do we disagree with each other? Another team operating principle you may want to consider is how do we treat confidentiality? Should we assume that everything we share in this room is confidential unless otherwise stated? Or should we assume that everything shared in this room is open unless stated that it is confidential? A lot of that will depend on your team and on what you're talking about, but you want to define that up front so that everyone knows what the rules of the game are. You don't want somebody going out and sharing what you just talked about in a meeting if the default is that everything is said in confidentiality. One other potential team operating principle is around fun. Is it okay to have fun in your team meetings? That is important to define so that people understand, is it okay for them to laugh? Is it okay for them to joke around? Is it okay for us to have a good time? Or is the team operating principle more, we are serious or we are focused when we are in this room together? These team operating principles, this handful of rules that guide your team, will help people understand if they're playing by the same rules. So here's what you're going to do. I want you to brainstorm what you would like your team operating principles to be, and then present them to your team. Give them the opportunity to weigh in on these and to tweak it and to shape it a little bit so that they're helping to shape the rules of the game that they're playing with. So this week you've been given 2 assignments. The first is to go through each person who reports to you and identify the level of trust that you have with them, the level of trust you'd like to get to, and then the next action. The second responsibility that you have is to first draft your team operating principles and then share those with your team. Help your team redefine those. As you begin to do that, you're going to create an environment in which safety takes place. In the next video, we're going to talk about the next 3 qualities of a great workplace community. The third is that there's a commitment to shared results. The fourth is support of individual flourishing. And the fifth is that you encourage a robust life outside of work. I can't wait to see you in the next video for us to talk more about community. Until then, unleash your leadership.